Hello, welcome to week 3. Hope you're having an awesome day and an awesome semester. All right, let's get started for this week, our lecture for this week. I have posted first a little bit of classroom logistics, a little classroom business. I have posted your first assignment, which is your close reading. It is a kind of assignment that you are very familiar with, using the skills that you have used and gained throughout your English education up to this point. So it's not a new genre. It's not asking you to use new skills or new information. And that's why it's a really low stakes assignment, just to get us started, our writing brains going, our creative juices flowing. So it is a low stakes assignment that's worth the least amount of points, but it will help to get those analytical skills sharpened for and dust off those analytical brains from the break from last semester up till now. Dust off those analytical brains, using those analytical skills again, so that when you write your rhetorical analysis, you'll be using the same skills that you use here, but on a higher stakes assignment, and also in conjunction with new skills and a new genre. Because the rhetorical analysis, I'm pretty certain for the majority of you, will be a new genre. I didn't write one in high school, and I'm doubting that you have either. So we're sort of sharpening these skills before we get to where we really need to use them on an assignment that's worth more points later on this semester, the rhetorical analysis. And because the rhetorical analysis is a new genre for you, you'll get 2 shots at it. So if you've looked, I hope that some of you have already checked Blackboard. If you looked yesterday, I posted, 1, the discussion blog, right? So go ahead and get started early on that. And 2, remember that's due by Friday at midnight. And 2, I posted the prompt, the instructions for your first assignment. And it is only analyzing a single paragraph of a single article that we've read. I'm asking you to look at Sue's The End of White America and analyze 1 paragraph from it, okay? So read those instructions more carefully and go ahead and get started on outlining that assignment, all right? Also, I've uploaded a rubric. So writing is these people that don't like writing and students that don't like writing and don't believe they're good at it, don't like it because it is subjective. It is a skill that's subjective, meaning that there's not a right or wrong answer. In math, 2 + 2 = 4. 4 is the only answer you can get. Well, that's not really the case in writing, as all of you know, because you have turned in papers your entire life in school. So the people that don't like writing, that's what they really dislike about it. So since it is subjective, I've given you 2 different rubrics so you know exactly really what I'm judging on, the skills I'm looking to see implemented in your writing, that you have a good grasp of these skills, and the material that I want to see implemented in your writing. This is really just to sort of gauge where your writing skills are at from high school, because all of you come from different educational backgrounds. Okay? So having said that, there are 2 rubrics to make it really clear what's expected of you on this assignment. And those are uploaded with the prompt there's a new tab on the left-hand side menu in Blackboard, and it is called Assignments. And your first assignment, the close reading, will be under there along with the rubrics. Okay? All right. Also, make sure that you get your books. I've been typing up the questions and sending you links for the articles, but now that we're 3 weeks in, next week I probably won't do that. So make sure you have your books by next week, so that you can look up the questions yourself and read the articles yourself. Okay, so that I don't have to keep finding links and keep typing up the questions. All right? Okay, so let's begin with our lecture today. Today I want to go over both the prompt at the end of this lecture, real quickly, in case something about it is confusing. But before that, I want to go over critical reading strategies and how to complete a close reading. Okay, so that you know what you're doing, right? And none of this that you're being asked to do is very new to you, again. But I want to give you a how to write a close reading, how to perform a close reading on a text. And before that, steps to accomplish a critical reading. Because before you can critically analyze the text, you'll need to read it critically, right? And there are steps to do that, as well as steps to perform a close reading. So let's go over those steps for close reading, all right? The first thing you want to do is preview a text before you actually read it. I know that especially myself, because I, throughout my academic career, high school, middle school, master's, bachelor's, doctorate, I've had more reading than I could ever finish. I'm actually kind of a slow reader. I'm a meticulous, methodical reader and really want to understand what I've read. So I don't read quickly. It takes me a long time to finish a novel. So having said that, I want to tell you that I don't always perform all these steps. I'll be completely honest with you that I don't always perform all these steps. And a lot of time I skip right over the introduction because I've got so much reading to do in so little time. Having said that, these steps will benefit you and help you to understand. Cut down the time you spend rereading to try to understand if you perform these steps prior to, during, and after reading the text. All right? So I've got sort of a how-to, several steps for before you read the text, during the text, and after the text, all right? The first is to preview the text. You want to learn a little bit about the text before you actually read it, and that is priming your brain. If you are going to play a softball game, you want to psych yourself up to play in that softball game. You want to get in the right frame of mind. Well, same thing with your brain. You want to prepare it to read this specific text, okay? That way, you already have a set of expectations in your brain about what information you're about to encounter, okay? So, previewing enables you to get a sense of what the text is about and how it is organized before reading it closely, and that's really going to help your level of understanding. It's a really simple strategy, seeing what you can learn from the head notes, footnotes, headings, any kind of headings, major headings, subheadings, and their introductory material, even the little blurb about the author. So skimming to get an overview of the content and organization can also help you to identify the rhetorical situation, answer some of those questions about the rhetorical situation. Remember that we just talked about last class lecture. Who's the author? What is the author's purpose? And reading a little bit about the background of the author will clue you into their background and their ideals and beliefs and their purpose, right? Kind of their frame of reference, where they're coming from. It'll give you information like level of education, their age, their employment history, and other information like that. Normally when you look when you read a blurb about an author in the back of the book or in the back at the end of the article, wherever it is, right? So do that. But also, as you're previewing, you want to come up with questions. You want to read the title and then come up with 3 questions that you're going to try to answer by the end of the text. That helps you to keep your brain engaged instead of just reading through it and on autopilot, right? I've been there so many times where I read a page, a paragraph, 10 pages, an entire chapter, and I finish the chapter and I don't have any idea what I've just read. So part of the previewing is looking at the headings and subheadings, the title, the author's background, and any other introductory material. And formulate questions based on what you learned from doing your preview. that you try to answer by the end of your reading. Okay, and that will really help your level of understanding. Contextualize. Number 2, contextualize. Now, unless it's a diary entry or a novel that we've written by ourselves, we don't have the exact context. We have to create it, right? Because it didn't come from our frame of reference. It's coming from another frame of reference, the author's frame of reference. And that can include a different culture, different time period, and also it's in a different biographical context. The author has a different biographical situation, background than you do. All those things make the context different from what you might understand and from what you might write yourself. Okay? So 2, we've got to contextualize it. And I really believe that this is the number one tip that when parents ask me, when I'm dealing with high school students, when parents ask me, they're about to start Shakespeare. What's the number one tip that you can give them to help them understand? And I tell them contextualize it. Shakespeare lived in a very different time. And if you know a little bit about Shakespeare as a person, we don't know a whole lot about him historically, but there's some information that can clue you in to some of his purpose and to some of the meaning of what he's saying. Some of his message can help you understand his message, right? He's got different biographical details, different time in history, and absolutely completely different historical context during Elizabethan England, right? Okay. So this really is very helpful. Texts, all of them have completely different contexts that you're going to need to familiarize yourself with and place yourself inside. Okay, so having said that, when you read a text, you read it from your own point of view, right? Your understanding of the words on the page is influenced by what you have experienced and by your background, by all those different details that influence authors and readers, meaning your sexual orientation, your age, geographic location where you grew up at, your religious background, your political affiliation, all of those things, right? The list goes on and on and on. Gender identity, all of these which might influence how you receive and understand a text or the kind of material that you yourself would choose to write about, right? Influence your frame of understanding, your frame of reference. Is influenced by what you have experienced, living in a particular time and place, and what you value. But the texts that you read are all written by someone else. Sometimes someone in a very different time or place, often. To read critically, you need to acknowledge the context and recognize the difference between the author's point of view and yours, and the point of view represented in the text. Okay? So be sure to do that. Number 3, formulate questions to understand and remember. I touched on this a little bit, but you want to be formulating questions at the beginning and the middle of the end of your reading. Don't just stop with one set of questions after you do your preview. Have a set of questions as you're reading and write them out to the margins. Because as you're reading, you can still be writing questions that you want to try and find the answer to by the end of your reading. And then by the end of your reading, you still won't understand everything, so you'll still have questions at the end of your reading. Write those down too. Okay. As students, you're really used to teachers asking you questions to help you understand about your reading. Just going to adjust the camera here just a little bit, sort of in my way a little bit. Okay, there we go. Sorry. That's better. Okay. And it was in the way of my computer. So, these questions are designed to help you understand your reading. But what I essentially want is for me to become unnecessary. And that means that you've got to come up with these questions that I would ask you on your own. Come up with your own questions for understanding. So, this is not a new thing, right? You're used to being asking questions about everything that you've read. When you need to understand and use new information that you gain, you can formulate your own questions as you read the text for the first time. especially for difficult readings and material that you want to understand better later and remember for later. Write a question for each paragraph or each section. All right? Each question needs to focus on the main idea, not specific details or specific examples, but the main idea, and really aim to ask questions about the concepts that the author is dealing with, the overall big picture concepts and thoughts that the author is really working with. Okay? Reflect on challenges to your beliefs and values. All right. Some of the reading, most of these articles are chosen. I didn't, edit this textbook. I didn't compile it. I didn't choose what articles and authors to include. But I have used it for several semesters. And I will say that it's chosen so that the articles do challenge your beliefs and values. And if not challenge them, at least prompt you to think more closely about them. They raise difficult questions, in other words. So you want to reflect on how the author is challenging your views and values. How and why, right? How are they doing that? Why are they doing that? What specific purpose would they have for challenging your specific belief in blank, whatever it might be? And reflect on why you had the emotion, the reaction that you did to their challenging your beliefs. Why did sometimes you react really positively? I totally agree. I love that. Examine that reaction. What does it say about your own beliefs? And sometimes you react really negatively. I really don't like being challenged in this way. I really don't like what they had to say. Examine why. Don't just agree and move on without critically thinking about it, and don't just completely disagree and refuse to listen to whatever else they say because you disagree, but really examine why you disagree, and if that disagreement is unfounded or founded, if your beliefs and values are founded or unfounded. What is the basis behind your beliefs? What is the basis behind the author's beliefs? Okay? So some of your reading that you're assigned might challenge your beliefs and values and attitudes that you've had coming into this classroom, coming into this semester on current issues. When you read a text for the first time, mark those areas. Okay, what they said here really bothered me. I'm not sure why yet, but it really bothered me, and I'm going to pinpoint a specific belief that's being challenged here to help me determine why I'm bothered. A lot of us know what we believe in, but maybe not necessarily why. They're just sort of beliefs that we've always had since childhood that we haven't questioned. And that's exactly what this class is about, is questioning those beliefs that you have always held and asking what is underlying those beliefs? What is supporting those beliefs? Can you support them? Or is there really not support for those beliefs and values? What support is there? Or maybe is it time to let go of an outdated, unsupportable belief? Okay? And reading these texts can help you do that. These authors will help you do that. So mark those sections where you feel as though you've been challenged, where the author's beliefs don't align with yours, or the opposite, where they really do align closely with yours and you really like what's being said. Pinpoint a specific belief and go back to those passages. Mark a brief note in the margins also about how you feel when you read that passage, why you circled it. And what in the text created that challenge to your belief? What is it specifically in that text that created the challenge to the belief? Then go back and look at those places where you felt personally challenged. Look for patterns. If you're unsure the how and why the author is challenging you, if you're unsure why you felt challenged, look for patterns in the places that you marked. All right? I'll tell you that again and again as you're analyzing text, to look for patterns, but especially in this step too. Look for patterns in those sections that you marked where you felt your beliefs were challenged. Okay. Outline and summarize. Of course, you want to identify the main ideas, probably a blurb, just not even a complete sentence, but identifying the main idea next to each paragraph will not only help you understand the author's ideas, but more importantly, because I think a lot of us are pretty good at that, identifying what the main idea of a paragraph is. We have a lot of practice with that. But more than that, jotting the main idea out to the side of each paragraph will help you understand how the author built their argument, how they built upon the ideas. And in paragraph number 1, they're presenting this idea. Paragraph number 2, they've added to that idea by introducing this idea. And you can very easily see at a glance how the author has built their argument, how they have structured their argument. You can critique that later. You can say later, their argument is not effective because their structure is very unclear, or their structure is not the most effective for this reason. And you've got your evidence right there if you have the main idea written beside each paragraph. You've got the tools there, the evidence to critique the author's structuring of their argument. Just because they're an author that writes well, that's been chosen for this textbook, doesn't mean that they couldn't structure their argument better or that their structure's effective. That's what we're here to critique, okay? And writing out the main idea, doing an outline of their writing will help you with that. You always want to outline your own writing, but of course you can make an outline of these articles that we read too, okay? It reveals the basic structure of the text and summarizing concepts, and summarizes concepts really succinctly so that you've got a really great grasp on the overall ideas and the concepts so that you can critique them, okay? All right. Evaluating the argument. Finally, now that we've done all that, gathered our evidence, we're ready to evaluate the argument. Writers all make claims that they want you to accept as true. They want you to agree to come on this journey with them. They're going down this road, which they set out in their introduction. In their introduction, they're telling you where they're going to go. They want you to follow them. And that if at any point you disagree, then you're not following the same road. So along the way, they will present to you ideas and claims, make claims that they want you to accept as true. They want you to follow along with them, along their path that they've created for their reader. As a critical reader, you can't blindly follow them. You cannot accept everything that you read or see as valuable, right? And as truth. Nor should you just outright reject everything because it wasn't your idea, right? So we've got to find some kind of happy medium. Every claim needs to be evaluated. So another really great benefit to summarizing, just that, not even a complete sentence, but just that blurb out by side each paragraph, is that blurb with the main idea also normally contains the main claim, the claim that the author is making, the main idea of that single paragraph, and the claim that the author is making. So you can decide, so it helps you much more easily to evaluate the claims one by one, the main claims in each paragraph, right? Okay. So I will go into this in quite a bit more detail, how to construct an argument. But for now, we are really looking at evaluating claims. And we'll talk more about evaluating claims too, and examining the basis for claims later. But for now, we're just talking about critical reading steps, and this is one of them, okay? You want to look at the support that the author gives you. And the support could be in the form of a belief, assumption, a value. It could be in the form of evidence, which is facts, examples, statistics, and authoritative commentary from authorities in the field, scientists, anthropologists, whatever discipline it is, right? That gives you as the reader a reason to accept the claim. But you should not take all of the evidence at face value as fact either. Like we were talking about earlier in the rhetorical situation, sometimes authors don't present the right kind of evidence for their audience. And I always kind of talk about scripture. For some audiences, that is foolproof evidence. For some audiences, it's going to alienate your audience, and the audience is not going to accept anything else you have to say because it is not what they consider solid evidence, right? So you have to evaluate the kind of evidence that the author has given you. Is it the right kind? Is it the most effective kind of evidence given the claim they're trying to support? Okay. When you evaluate an argument, you're concerned with the logic of the author's reasoning as well as its truthfulness, and they're not the same thing. At the most basic level, in order for an argument to be acceptable, the support must be appropriate to the claim, the right kind of support for the kind of claim that's being made. And the statements must be consistent with one another. Be careful not to accept an argument just because it supports your own point of view. And again, don't reject an argument just because it does not support your point of view. What matters is the strength of the argument. Is it logical, and is it truthful? Is it well supported? All right. Question or step number 7, not question number 7. Step number 7, evaluate and contrast related readings. So you want to place what you've just read in conversation with other authors and other articles speaking about the same topic to really contextualize the argument. There is a broader conversation about the same topic happening in the world, and you want to place the article that you've just read in that broader conversation. Other authors are talking about the same issue. And so you don't just want one viewpoint on this certain issue, the viewpoint that is in your textbook. You want to contextualize it by placing it within the broader argument, what other authors have to say about the same view. The article you read in your textbook might be very liberal. The article you read in your textbook might be very conservative. And to balance that, you really need someone that's moderate and someone that's more conservative and someone that's liberal. You need kind of all three viewpoints to really balance, to come up with a balanced viewpoint and some measure of truthfulness. Get as close to the truth as we can by balancing these extreme viewpoints. Okay? So many of the authors we read are concerned with the same issues or questions, but they all approach them in different ways because they have different backgrounds and they're coming from different viewpoints, right? So fitting a text into an ongoing conversation that exists outside the text that you're reading is really important. And it can increase our understanding of why an author approached that topic in the way that they did, a particular issue or question in the way that they did. Okay? So let's review real quickly. 1, preview. 2, contextualize. 3, formulate questions to understand and remember. 4, reflect on challenges to beliefs and values. 5, outline and summarize. 6, evaluate the argument. 7, compare and contrast related readings. I always recommend, especially because these articles are not very long, first reading for understanding. Do I just basically get the gist of what's going on? The second time, you're reading with a more critical, analytical eye to analyze the logic and the truthfulness of what's contained within the article, okay? First is just to get what the author's saying, basically, what's being said here. And the second time you read the article is to understand how it's being said, why it's being said, and to analyze its soundness, the soundness of the argument, okay? Okay, so those are our critical reading strategies that I want to see you employ to critically analyze a section of, a paragraph of The End of White America, all right, which we read for last week. Okay. I want to talk a little bit more about pre-reading, just to clarify what exactly that is. You want to look at the length. How long is the essay? You want to budget enough time to read it without interruption, without getting burnt out and not finishing. You want to look at the title, examine the title. Different titles make us react in different ways. And when we're in the classroom and we have discussion, I often ask students to look at the reading for that day, for that class period. I'm not able to do this because we're remote right now, but I will start with the title. Before I allow them to finish reading the article or start reading the article, start with the title and then ask them what they think the article might be about. Does the title offend you? Does the title make you happy? Does the title make you laugh? Is the title vague and you really don't get much information at all? Titles that don't give very much information at all aren't very effective titles. So we can learn a lot about titles just from the title. What rhetorical expectations does it create in your mind just by reading the title? What expectations does it create in terms of the content that you're about to read? The author's content, the essay's content. Sometimes you can determine the author's focus just by, in advance, just by looking at the label that they've given their writing, their essay. All right? It provides rhetorical hints on how the author is positioning the reader to understand and react to their ideas. All right? For instance, politics in expansion in the Western Hemisphere is different from Nazi politics in America, right? You're automatically going to kind of snap to attention because Nazi is a polemic word. It's a divisive word. It's an inflammatory word, right? So the author has made a specific choice, wants you to react in a shocked, kind of surprised way if they use that word Nazi in their title. That is the rhetorical effect of that one word. Okay, so titles have a very strong rhetorical effect, especially if you title your essay effectively. All right. Next, you want to look at the author. You can get an idea about why they have the ideas that they have, because you'll be finding out how old they are, their sex, their level of education, where they grew up, or where they're from in the United States or in the world. And we know that certain regions have certain values and beliefs just like certain individuals do, right? So it also gives you an idea about the author's expertise, what kind of knowledge the author has. And then just kind of read a blurb of the beginning and the end. That helps you to get a sense of where the essay goes, the scope of the argument. How broad is the argument and where is the argument headed? A really good introduction will tell you exactly where the argument is headed, and then the conclusion will just end up exactly where the introduction said that the author would end up. All right? Okay. You want to also look for signposts, important words. So look for important words, recurring words, unknown words, oddly used words, and ambiguous words. Words that repeat throughout the essay are important to understanding. Write them down in the margins, okay? Unknown words, look them up. We've had a lot of practice doing this. Circle unknown words, circle words that pop up again. Because often they have a close relation to the theme that the author is taking up, or the main idea that the author is taking up. Oddly used words. Sometimes an author will use a word that is used in a way that it is not conventionally used, that we don't normally see it when we come across it. So circle that and try to understand why the author used that word in that way. What is the rhetorical effect? What is the intended rhetorical effect? What effect does that have on the audience? This strange usage of this word. And then ambiguous words. So sometimes confusion can result when an author uses a word in one sense and the reader, you yourself, interpret it in another sense. So circle those instances as well. Locate and identify parts you do not understand. This is very, very important. Mark confusing sections so that you're able to, if the essay confuses you, you're able to go back to the parts that confused you most and start there. Figure out what it is exactly that's confusing you. And to do that, you want to mark confusing sections. And of course, reread those confusing sections and talk it over with other readers in our discussion board or with me, okay? Now, very, very, very important. I have told you that I will give you a list of some questions about each reading that we do, but that mainly I'm going over this critical reading skills now and steps now so that you can come up with your own questions. But that's really broad. There are a million different kinds of questions, categories of questions that you could have about whatever text you read, depending on what confuses you and depending on what stands out to you. So I'm going to mark them into 6 different categories for you, so that the questions that you want to come up with fall into these categories, which will help you analyze it more efficiently and more effectively, okay? To help you come up with the kinds of questions that I would ask you and that your other English teachers would ask you. 1, you want to talk back to the text. Talk back to the author. They don't have the authority on the subject, the complete authority on the subject. They had their chance to convince you, and you also have a chance to talk back to them. So definitely do that. In your margins, in your notes, talk back to them, disagree with them, agree with them. If you've been reading critically and you've been thinking, then you'll have some thoughts to express in words. So do that in the margin and talk back to the author. If you aren't creating responses to the text as you read, paragraph by paragraph, then you're not really thinking about what you're reading and you're not absorbing it, okay? So write down, I disagree with the author here, I agree with the author here, and why. All right? It doesn't have to be complete sentences. Of course, none of these notes have to be complete sentences. All right? Ask questions to the text. Here's what I mean by that. The key to convert you from a passive reader who reads entire paragraphs or entire articles and has no idea what they just read and has no thoughts about what they read, that's a passive reader. To converting you from a passive reader to an active reader is asking questions. You must ask questions and you must be trying to answer them throughout the entire process, reading process. Okay? Thinking can only express itself overtly in language. So get those thoughts outside of your head into words in the margins. Okay? As you read, ask, why did the author say that? What does this part mean? Asking questions and answering questions forces you to actively read instead of passively. Okay? Ask questions about yourself. So that's asking questions about the actual words in the text. Next, you'll want to ask questions about yourself. What is your attitude towards the issue? These are great questions to ask even before you begin reading, because you want to understand clearly what your attitude is toward the issue before you start becoming influenced by the author's attitude towards the reading, right? So really determine what your attitude is towards the subject just by reading the title before you begin to read the author's ideas. Then the author's ideas can influence your viewpoint, but you want to be able to examine how far your views have changed after reading the article, okay? So ask questions about yourself. What is your attitude toward the issue? What are your prejudgments about this issue? Does your attitude affect how receptive you are to the author's viewpoint? What preconceptions do you have about the topic? All of us have preconceptions about every topic. What past experiences have you had that are pertinent to the topic, that have shaped your ideas regarding the issue? Monitor your own emotions as you read. Ask why you react in certain ways, in certain places in the article. Do certain sections make you feel pleased, guilty, angry, annoyed, smug, saddened? What is it? Right? Come up with an adjective. Do you think the author intended to create that effect? If not, where did the emotional response originate? If not with the author's words. All right? You always want to be thinking about, how does the author want me to feel when I read this paragraph? Do they want me to be confused, amused, angry, sad? What does the author want me to feel so that their message comes across clearly in this specific paragraph? Okay? Ask questions about context. Here's that word again. Ask questions about context. Think about the author. Why do you think the author takes the position that they do? Why do you think that they have the viewpoint that they have? Oh, because they're older, because they're a woman, because they're Christian, because they're gay, because they're a minority, whatever it is, right? Try to imagine why the author might feel this way about this certain issue, okay? Questions about context. Is there a personal investment in the matter? Is the author biased because of their personal experience with this issue? What larger social, economic, geographic, political circumstances have influenced the creation of this piece of writing and have influenced the author's ideas, values, and beliefs? Social, economic, geographical, and political factors. All right, those are not the only ones. I've gone over some others before, but those are especially important. Okay? Read between the lines and think about context in which the material was originally written and what that might mean today. Are the original conditions so different today that they render the argument invalid, that their argument's not relevant anymore because the conditions have changed so much? Or does it hold just as true? We're talking about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Have conditions changed so much that that speech really isn't relevant? Or is the argument still as relevant today as it was back then in 1963? Okay. Ask questions about the broader implications. So the ideas that the author is presenting to you are constricted by their context, cultural, geographical, political, social, and even just the constraints of the length of the text and the medium of the text, right? The way the text is delivered, whether it's a speech or internet, there are constraints on every type of medium and every type of genre or format. So get rid of those constraints and think about the broader implications. Take those authors' ideas out of the article and apply them in the wider world. All right? To do that, we need to ask questions. Ask questions about broader implications. The author asserts that X is true. What happens if we follow that statement to its logical conclusion, if we accept it and follow it to its logical conclusion? Ideas do not exist in a vacuum, right? They spread outward like a ripple in a pond, okay? So create some ripples. Throw some stones. If an essay asserts that all life is holy and that killing any other living organism is absolutely wrong no matter what, does that imply that we should stop using pesticides? Apply it to situations outside the original context that the author intended. Okay? What follows from the ideas, the claims, what follows if we accept the author's claims unconditionally? And what kind of conditions, caveats, does the author place on their own argument? What kind of restrictions do they place on the scope of their argument? Often, 90% of the time, majority of authors will not make a claim that's unconditional. They will place conditions upon their claim, right? So what happens if we accept a claim unconditionally? That's the only way for us to be able to see the flaws in a claim, right? Is to carry it out unconditionally to its logical conclusion in circumstances outside the conditions that the author intended, outside the context that the author intended originally. Okay. So once you do that, you want to seek relevant connections. The author in their introduction should have answered the so what question. Why am I reading this? Why does this matter to me? Okay, so seeking relevant connections. You want to seek relevant connections. The author should make clear to you why you should care about the issue if they answer the so what question in their introduction. But you need to figure out for yourself, why does this matter? Why should I care? Seek relevant connections in your own experience, somehow to relate it to your own experience and to the world beyond. Right? So how does the argument personally impact you? How is it important to you? What personal significance does it bring to your life? Does it have communal importance for those around you, the community that you're a part of? How does it connect to your life now, 30 years from now? What potential implications might it have on your life in the future, right? There's all kinds of implications that it could have, not just for you, but for the community and the world at large, okay? Seek relevant connections and you will find them. If the topic doesn't seem important to you immediately, you can't immediately come up with connections, why does the author think it's important? Okay? All right. So those are my steps for close reading and how to, or critical reading, how to read critically as you're reading through a text. Now, how to complete a close reading. Once you've done the reading, how to actually put together and outline a close reading essay. Okay? First of all, you want to read with a pencil and annotate the text. So this is basically, as I just said, doing all those steps prior to outlining your essay, prior to organizing your thoughts, annotating the text, right? So that's how you begin. 2, everything that you have highlighted, circled for whatever reason, and make sure that you do write down the reason that you circled a certain passage. So you come back to it and say, okay, this stood out to me, but now I don't remember why. Circle why you, or note why you circled it, right? Then you want to look for patterns, the things that you've noticed about the text, about its organization, about its repetitions, about its contradictions, about similarities between paragraphs. All of these different things, whatever patterns you notice. What do you notice from the passages that you've highlighted? What do all the passages you've highlighted have in common, right? Okay, so you'll want to do that. Then, in that instance, you're working on particulars, really. You're getting down into the particular. Third, ask questions about the patterns. Once you've identified patterns about what stood out to you. So first, you want to circle what stands out to you for whatever reason. 2, you want to recognize patterns in the certain sections that stood out to you. What does everything I circled have in common, right? Third, this is where you can come up with your analysis. This is the analysis part. Ask questions about the patterns you've noticed, especially how and why. So, as you see now, we're just continually asking questions. Never stop asking questions. So part of the critical reading is to ask questions in the margins of the text, and then to ask questions about the patterns that you've noticed after critically annotating the text. When you critically annotate the text, patterns will emerge, and then you want to ask questions about those patterns. So as you're critically annotating the text, you're asking questions about the text. And then once you've done that, you're asking questions about the patterns that you've noticed. Okay? So asking questions to identify patterns, and then asking questions about those patterns that you've identified. If the way I said it sounds a little confusing, but you see what I mean. Always ask me questions if something's unclear too, okay? So you're asking questions, and then from those questions you can identify patterns, and then you want to ask questions about the patterns that you identify. So to answer some of our own questions, we have to look back at the text and see what else is going on, right? So how or why does this pattern keep appearing? The how and the why are the two main questions you want to answer about the patterns that you identify. Patterns can be repetitions in speech. Patterns can be repetitions in sentence structure or paragraph structure. Patterns can be a repetition of ideas, right? Lots of different kinds of patterns. Our brains are trained to recognize patterns, so that should come pretty easily. Okay. So that third part is the analysis part. From there, you can begin to develop an outline about your own close reading. What observations have you made about the text, and how can you tie those observations together? Okay? So those observations are the patterns that you observe. And how can you tie those patterns together, right? How can you tie those observations together into patterns? Then you can say something about those patterns, and that will be the analysis, right? What I really want you to focus on here is taking your observations, moving your observations from observation to analysis. I observe that the sky is blue. I observe that the grass is green. Those are observations, but that is not analysis. To analyze, you're tying those observations together. Tie those observations together. I need to tie my observation that the sky is blue and the grass is green together into something meaningful, okay? It's a little bit of a silly analogy, but it makes sense, right? Okay, so those 3 steps. First, you want to annotate the text to do a close reading. Then you want to look at your annotations, look at what you've annotated, look at what stood out to you, find patterns, and then ask questions about those patterns and the answers that you come up to those questions, the answers that you come up with to those questions, how and why are these patterns appearing, will form the basis of your analysis. Okay? Steps 1, 2, and 3. Annotate, find patterns in those annotations, and 3, ask questions how and why about those annotations, about those patterns that you have discovered. Okay. A little bit more on how to write a close reading essay. First of all, I chose, only one paragraph because I want you to get into a lot of really significant detail. We're good at making general observations. We're bad at analyzing minute details, right? In general. So this gives you a chance to meticulously look at the details of a text. Its structure, its word choice, its ideas, everything. Sentence patterns, sentence structure, right? So a close reading in general focuses on definition, on tiny themes in a larger literary passage, story, or poem, or article. Lots of essays, other genres of essays cover the bigger themes. Justice, love, revenge. And the articles will cover those bigger themes too. We're really looking at defining a much smaller theme, a much smaller idea that's presented in just one paragraph, okay? The bigger themes are really prevalent and obvious. You have to look a lot harder and a lot more closely for these smaller themes, okay? You don't have to look hard to find them. They're right there. Big neon signs, right? The author wants you to understand what their main theme is. On the other hand, the purpose of a close reading is to discuss what can be uncovered when you look beyond those overt themes to the author's nuances, the author's subtleties, right? It's the academic equivalent of, searching under every rock and stone, okay? A close reading asks you to scrutinize the smaller, more hidden themes and determine how they connect to the larger themes. With an essay like this, you'll need to be able to discuss how the author uses language, right? Which from day one, when I talked about rhetoric, I told you that's what rhetoric is how author uses language. Not what's being said, but how it's being said, right? So I want you to begin to think about that, because your rhetorical analysis will focus completely on that. So you'll need to talk about how the author uses language to really search the text for its smaller themes, its minute details, okay? As well as what the author omits. Sometimes what the author doesn't say is as important as what they do say, right? Okay. So it's really a deep dive. It's going down the rabbit hole. It is picking it apart, and in this instance, you cannot read too much into any single word, right? That's what you need to be doing. A close reading requires that you extract as much information as possible from the smallest amount of text. This type of essay also asks that you're able to interpret the text and apply it to the meaning of the greater themes of the greater story, which in this case would be the rest of the article, right? A close reading essay should have something interesting and new to say about the ideas. You're analyzing the author's ideas in a new way. After reading the article, you should have a much better handle on what is expected from you when crafting an essay. Okay, after this lecture, you should have a much better idea so far up to this point about what's expected of you. All right, so I'm going to go through several steps. All right, several steps, and remember that writing is recursive. I give this speech every semester too. Writing is recursive, so I've got 10 different steps. You can return to any one of these steps at any time if you notice that your essay is breaking down at some point, okay? But here's essentially in 10 steps how to complete a close reading essay. All right. One is, of course, read the text at least 3 times. I recommend reading the entire article 3 times, but again, you're only asked to speak about and analyze 1 paragraph, okay? The first time, just read to familiarize yourself with the content. The second time, read to explore details. And the third time, read as closely and slowly as possible, okay? You're going to have the most success if you do that. Number 2, underline and highlight portions of the text, we've already been talking about this, that you find odd or significant. These can be things that stand out to you. It can be repetitive words, sometimes even the punctuation, interesting syntax, meaning the way that the author structured their sentence, or other details that you didn't notice earlier. Take time to do this step slowly. This is how you make good discoveries, not rushing past the details. Step 3, take stock of all details that you've underlined. Think about what unites them or what unites some of them. What conclusions can you draw about the details that you've underlined? How can you connect those conclusions to the broader theme of the article, the broader idea of the article, the main idea of the article? And then you want to write down those conclusions that you come to after making all your observations. After you've tied your observations together and made conclusions, write them down. Hopefully you've got more than one to choose from. The strongest one will be your thesis, okay? Then you want to go and circle the strongest piece of textual evidence for your thesis from the paragraph that we're reading. Then you want to develop your thesis statement with a hook that interests your reader in your topic, in your analysis, in your idea. Then you want to discuss the concept in 3 or more sentences in your introduction, and an overall introduction to your idea in your thesis. State your thesis at the end of the introductory paragraph. We'll go over steps on how to write a thesis, especially a thesis in general, and then specifically a thesis for rhetorical analysis later. Pretty soon, within the next couple weeks, okay? But for now, you're going to have to rely on what you know about writing a thesis statement, or bring your thesis statement to me and have me look over it, okay? All right. Step number 8. So step number 7 was to write your thesis statement, discussing your ideas, introducing your ideas in 3 sentences or more. Step number 8, use your first body paragraph to explain your first piece of textual evidence. It should be a small, very specific detail, syntax, imagery, repetition, or something else you noticed, maybe even in just one sentence. Discuss why it's significant and how it supports your overall thesis. Okay? Repeat that step with the next 2 body paragraphs. So in this way, you don't have to format your essay exactly in this way. But if you do 3 body paragraphs, then you want to pick out 3 specific ideas and connect them from the paragraph that we are looking at of the end of White America. Okay? So you've got your 3 body paragraphs. Step 9 is to repeat that with the next 2 body paragraphs. Explain how the one detail that you've extracted is important to your overall thesis. 10, conclude your article by summarizing the main crux of your argument using new language without repeating yourself. Remind the reader how these details enhance their understanding of the article that you are speaking about and analyzing. Connect your thesis to a bigger picture issue of the era of humanity. So the end of White America. There are so many ways to connect that to the broader world, current events, or anything like that. So many ways to connect that to the wider world. It has broader implications even now. Even though this argument was written quite a few while, at least over a decade ago, right? So connect it to the wider world, to a broader issue of humanity that affects humanity, all right? So that should really be, if you follow all those steps, you'll be pretty successful writing your close reading. Let me know if you have any other questions about the prompt. Remember, it is under assignments on the left-hand menu on Blackboard, or any other need help getting started, or want to run ideas by me. Let me know if you come across any problems or have any concerns, okay? As you begin to outline this essay. It will be due on, let me check my calendar again. So terrible with dates. Friday the 16th. So you've got almost 2 weeks. Okay, not this Friday, but next Friday. All right? At midnight, just like all the other assignments. All right. I will see you next week.